So welcome back, everybody. We are going to Be'ez Hashem today conclude chapter 34, and Be'ez Hashem try to even begin and learn a part of chapter 35, because we're holding pretty much towards the end of 34. So Alter Rebbe is touching upon over here that as we learned in the previous parakim, the previous chapters, that a crucial component in our Avodas Hashem is the notion of simcha, joy, elation, gladness of heart, and so on and so forth. So Alter Rebbe elaborated, it's not stam a simcha, just go for a tencel, for a little dance, and be happy, be merry. But again, the in detail how the Alter Rebbe explains and ration and in a very b'tzura sichlit, in a very much of an explanatory manner, the importance, how important it is, and how part and parcel the notion of simcha is in our Avodas Hashem. So again, if you can see it in the previous chapters, and again, I welcome everybody to. You can see it again, even on this very website, just on the link box, Tanya, or as I mentioned many times, the TanyaOnline.com website, which is again hosted by the same kosher tube, but for the newcomers over here, those you could find it. I mention it always, time and again, as there's always those who are newly attending the class, and I always suggest you can go to TanyaOnline.com, which is again, it's very organized, and it's a class namely for this the whole website rather. It's about this class, solely this class, the Tanya class, but namely you can easily follow the text there as well. Additionally, the easier access to the previous classes. So the Alter Rebbe points out in the end of the 34th chapter that on one hand, Alter Rebbe in the previous chapters spoke about the importance of simcha and avodas Hashem, joy, and the uplifted beat and uplifted spirit. On the other hand, the Alter Rebbe spoke about the lev nishbar v'nitka, in these very chapters, the broken heart, this broken spirit, and so on, which is also a crucial component. Famous Vart said from one of the great tzaddikim, there's no lev shalim, there's no whole heart. The whole heart is the broken heart. There's no greater, or there's no more of a whole heart than a broken heart. Now, today again, this is a Vart which very much is aligned with this, which David HaMelech said in the famous chapter Nun Aleph in Tehillim. But Alter Rebbe explains this in these very chapters, the how crucial it is, how important it is to have that lev nishbar, that's brochen ahad, the broken heart, and broken spirit, and how that brings down the sitra achra on high, that diffuses the energy of the evil spirit, or the impure spirit on high even, etc. Again, as you can see in these previous chapters. So how does it go together? You can't. Apparently, a person is a person, and it's not like a computer. You can just immediately switch and change programs. So how does it go together, or can it go together? In one hand, be b'samech, on one hand, a broken heart. So here, the Alter Rebbe touches upon this, and he brings from the Zayar a very interesting expression in the Zayar, which is p'chiyat kia b'liboy misitra dov. Lashon Zayir is, as we will see, this is again the conclusion of the chapter. We'll get to it shortly. That a cry is anchored in my heart on one side, and a joy is anchored in my heart on the other side. In other words, they can express themselves in the same heart, in the same person, because in the end of the day, they're both crucial in our Avodas Hashem. But let's see it inside over here. So we're holding page 86, pretty much towards the end of the chapter, about 10 lines before, or 9 lines before the end of the chapter. In the original text, you can see it on the corresponding English text as well, from the word vihine. So vihine b'chol pratim min simchas hanefesh, all the different types of joy and of the soul, Haniskarim La'el, which we explained and we mentioned before, again in these previous chapters. It is not that we're overriding the notion of one being shamed in his eyes, disgusted in his eyes, and a broken heart, now, and a broken spirit. This is again, this is the Lashon. I'll tell you quotes over here from the famous kapitel, famous chapter 51 in Tehillim, Ne'im Zmiris Yisrael, this Leiv Nivze Bein of Nimos, Leiv Nishbar, and then he says Ruach Nemucha, and so on. The Lashon, the idea is the Ruach, a broken spirit. So it's not that we're overriding this whole, the important, the essentiality in our Avodas Hashem, to have this Tzubrach Nahar, this broken heart. Which again, the Alter Rebbe explains over here in these very chapters, the importance, or what is David HaMelech, why did David HaMelech make an emphasis, and why is it so important, why is it so crucial, this Leiv Nishba V'nitke. So the Alter Rebbe says that it's not Ein Meniya, which means there's no prevention, meaning to say that it can go together. Why can it go together? Because we understand that it can go together with the notion of joy, which on the surface, again, like you said, if man is the human being can apparently, again, it's not just a robotic or doesn't work robotically, or like a computer, you just programs one program and then another program, and there's no affect the person, especially when you're dealing with emotion express themselves and have after effects and so on. So when you're dealing with simcha as one expression, it's a broken heart, sadness, or namely bitterness, mirirus. Remember the Alter Rebbe in chapter Lamed Aleph differentiates. It's not atzvus. It's not about atzvus, one being melancholy and so on, but it's mirirus. It's a very different type of expression. But akopanim, it is about bitterness, which also has its it's a full expression, and you can't just shut it off momentarily and on the moment, and it has its after effects. So how do they work together? So the Alter Rebbe says they can work together. Why? Because the bitterness is for one reason, and the joy is focusing in another dimension, and therefore they could be simultaneously expressed, or expressed in a way that they don't contradict. Perhaps, as to say better, they don't contradict each other. Why? Or they could work hand in hand. Why? Because the kihiyesi, he says, yeah, simultaneous. He does say simultaneous. He says, in the same time you're expressing your joy in Avodas Hashem, in the same time your heart could demonstrate this miridus, this bitterness, the heart could express its being it's a broken heart and broken spirits. B'shas, in the same time when you're expressing your joy in your relation to Avodas Hashem. Why so? And the answer is miyacher ki hayesi nivze be'enov umitzad haguf v'nefesh habahamis. This being shamed in his eyes, that's from the perspective of his body and his animal soul. And his joy is because of his godly soul, and the godly spark which is invested in his godly soul, to vitalize his godly soul. Now, like we learned before in Perek Lamed Aleph in the 31st chapter. Which means it's not for the same reason you're bitter is the same reason you rejoice. Then it would obviously be a contradiction. You can't say, and from the very experience, I'm joyful, and that very experience or that very reason, what brings me joy and brings me, it elevates and uplifts my spirit, that very reason it brings me in bitterness and a ruach nemucha, a broken spirit, and so on, a broken heart, a broken spirit. That would not work. Again, namely because especially when you're dealing with sentiments and emotions and so on. But the Alter Rebbe is pointing out is they're for two separate reasons. They're for two separate reasons. For example, someone eats and drinks, and you can do it together because they both have their function. This calms the eating calms the person, and drinking has its own effect. It quenches the person's thirst, or or it takes the solid food and is able to digest it easier when a person drinks, as is known. Each one has their function, and therefore they can be done simultaneously, even though they both have their own objective and they both express themselves in the person's body in a very different way. And the same thing, or similarly, Dr. Rebbe says over here, the reason why the person has this lev nishbar, the broken heart and the broken spirit, is because he has to deal with his baggage, he has to deal with this reality of his body and his animal soul, which has bodily temptations and bodily inclinations, and animal soul has animalistic temptations, animalistic inclinations, which naturally do not only don't lie, they disturb the person in his Avodas Hashem. He wants to go ahead and learn Torah, and the Nefesh Bahamis, his body said, no, sit, relax, and so on and so forth. And he looks back and he said, I should have learned Torah that hour. What interfered? Interference is always that the body and the animal soul, which has their own set of needs and own set of wants, and it constantly interferes. And it's not only something looking in hindsight, but on a constant basis. We know this is what interferes in our Avodas Hashem, and we have to deal with it. And we've dealt with it for a long time. Marichas Yamim Mishanim Tevis. For a long afakert, we ask Hashem that we should live long, but living long in this very physical world goes together with being in a physical body and a physical and a nefesh bahamis and an animal soul. It's a horror, but Alter Rebbe again so brilliantly points out, depicts the nefesh bahamis, the animal which exists within us. The animal soul exists within us, and again, it's not about yirah, it's not about evil, it's just about whatever. Ultimately, the animal is also not evil. It's just whatever contributes to its comfort, that's what it does, and we have that within ourselves. Sit back, be laid back. Or in Leisas, Hashem says, do not do that. And the animals within us says, that would bring you pleasure, God forbid. So we have to deal with that. Guf nefesh bahamis, and you're dealing with an Eved Hashem with knows and is focused on his mandate, why he came down to this world, to execute the messages of the nefesh elikis, of Torah, of mitzvahs, of God, and so on. And he understands and he appreciates this mandate that he was given to him, and he's on that conveyor belt, meaning to say he's moving along with passion and understanding, appreciation on that derech of Avodas Hashem, and then on a constant basis he has to deal with this which interferes, which again is guf, his nefesh baham, his body, his animal soul, or his yetzer hara. So the sadness, the bitterness, the broken heart and the broken spirit is about something totally different. Hence, it could be expressed simultaneous. Because the simcha, the joy, comes because I have a godly soul and I have a godly spark which is vitalizing the godly soul, meaning to say that I have within myself a chelik elokami mal mamash, a part of God mamash, and could a person be ever more joyful and more rejoice and stand in a tnua of Yisrei Memusa Nefesh, elation, and a soul in a state of exalt, more than the fact that just the knowledge that he has within himself a part of God. Mamash achelik lekami mal mamash. Could you think of anything else more joyful than that? Obviously not. And therefore a person is demanded, or it comes so natural that he's able to express a simcha, a joy, and an elation of heart on a constant basis. Because he has a nefesh elikis, he has a godly soul, which is being vitalized every moment from the godly spark, and ultimately the godly energy is vitalizing his nefesh elikis, and the nefesh itself is God in full sense of manifestation. Because again, it's not obscured by anything else, or it shouldn't be. It has the ability not to be. So it's a nefesh elikis, he has a godly soul, which is a chelik v'lekami mal, so he has to be constantly sameach. And he has the ability, because of his nefesh elikis, to implement his mandate for which he was created for. Lasis leizborah dira v'dachtenu, to make a Kadosh Baruch Hu, this world, for a Kadosh Baruch Hu, a dwelling place, via his learning Torah and his doing mitzvahs. And by extension, kol masechel shem shamayim v'chol derchecha do'ehu, as we explained again the other day. But together with that, he has to be, again, he has to have this broken heart and broken spirit, just because this is this which goes along the way that the Kadosh Baruch Hu established the Aveda, or the Yid, which would bring about, would implement HaKadosh Baruch Hu's objective and goal for creation, which is establishing HaKadosh Baruch Hu Adira B'Tachtenim, a dwelling place in this physical world. It came through the neshama investing in a body. And a body has, and again, it goes together with the nefesh bahamis, which are constantly interfere. The objective is to transform the nefesh bahamis, to transform the animal soul, like it says in the Mishnah of V'haftas Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha, that even the Yetzer Hara should love HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But that and in other words, to explain to the person himself, even the nefesh baham, even from the bodily perspective, the animalistic perspective, should also appreciate, like you could domesticate an animal. In other words, it becomes a more refined animal once it's domesticated. Similarly, we have to bring about the Avas Hashem also to Yetzer Hara, that we should understand that there's nothing really worth to invest in, not from the perspective of Nefesh Elokis. Nefesh Elokis doesn't need this information, that there's nothing worth more to invest in other than God and godliness and so on. But the objective, what the mission is telling us, that the Nefesh Yetzer Hara should appreciate that. So slowly but surely we have the ability to transform, and we have to. This is part of our mandate, to transform our body and our animal soul, to make it more refined and so on and so forth. But till we get there, and even when we do, and even when we're working on it, on the overall, it stands as an obstacle. And if it stands as we all know it, you know, to explain or elaborate on this, it stands as an obstacle, and therefore this is where David HaMelech said, it's because of the body and the animal soul, which is constantly telling me to give me a whole set of rules which are antithetical to the rules or to the information or the passion of the Nefesh Elokis, of the godly soul. That's why I'm tzebrach. We say rules, meaning say the animalistic or bodily animalistic, we mentioned before, the bodily animalistic inclinations, which are inclined to things which are bodily and animalistic. Things, again, ultimately would contribute to its own comfort, which contradict the person's moving along in his Avodas Hashem, in his service to God, for which he was created for. And that's why the person is tzebrach, and he's broken. So what Alter Rebbe is telling us over here is that it could be simultaneously, because for the reason why you're happy is not the reason why you're sad or you're bitter, and the reason why you're bitter is not the reason why you're happy, why you're joyous. And he brings over here Kahai Gavna. He said the Zayar, and here similarly it's brought in Zayar. Again, this is what we mentioned at the beginning of this class. This Zayar, that Pchiyat, this Alter Rebbe includes the Pedic, the Lamed Daled, the 44th chapter. Pchiyat kiv v'liboy misitrudo atzubrach in the hearts. A cry is anchored, to be literally translated, a cry is anchored in my heart from this side of my heart. And joy is anchored in my heart on this side, which means that they could express themselves simultaneous, because they're two sides of the heart. And namely, what the Zayir is basically saying is for two reasons. What I'm joy, again, what I stand b'simcha, b'chedva, is for one reason, and why I stand with pchia, with a cry, is for another reason. So they could express themselves simultaneous. And that's the end of chapter 34. And with this, we will begin, at this point, we'll begin Pedic Lamed Hey, the 35th chapter. Now, I want to say that even though every single Pedic in Tanya is so precious, and is a gem and a jewel on its own, which leads a Yid in any given time, with any given a challenge, an obstacle, to remain focused, and again in a very unique way, in the most unique way, which Alter Rebbe so brilliantly, obviously with the Koach of Kedusha, which he had, which Kedusha penetrates all the way to the nitty-gritty of reality. It's not just to be a Kaddish and just throw messages. You have to be holy, and you can't do this, and you can't do that, and so on, which we find in many other Svarim, which these people were holy. All the Bali Musar were very holy, and their messages were certainly divine. And we should learn these Svarim, because nonetheless they do make it. In the end of the day, they make an impact. Every Sefer Musar makes another impact in our Avodas Hashem, allowing us to stay focused for what we came down to this world. the Alter Rebbe's Likutei Amorim, the Alter Rebbe's Tanya, his approach to our Avodas Hashem, or dealing with our Avodas Hashem, our challenges and obstacles, and dealing with them and explaining us the Derech Ha'ela Beis Keil, the perfect way how to ascend onto the Derech HaMelech, on the way of Melech Malcham Melech HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is undoubtedly very unique. Meaning to say, the Kedusha comes down to the nitty-gritty we mentioned before. Meaning to say, the Alter Rebbe comes down to the very, very challenges and to the very nuances of our challenging life as a Yid, and deals with it and helps us to go ahead with joy again and focus on this Derech HaMelech, on this way of to fulfill our mandate in our Avodas Hashem, and again in a very, very unique style, which the more we learn Tanya, we realize the incredible kayach and the incredible personality, or the incredible tzidkus of the Alter Rebbe. It wasn't just throwing messages on high, Kedeshim Tiyu and so on. He dealt especially with his unique approach, is that the mandate of the Yid is not to be a tzaddik, the mandate of Yid to be a Beinani, and explain what the Beinani is. And again, this is just by far the most accepted by so many. It's not over here mentioning it over here. This is accepted so many in the last 300 years. And encourage everybody to learn Tanya. You would see it literally metamorphoses, changes our whole approach to our Avodas Hashem. And despite we live in a world which is a provocative world, we could even say that, be bold and candid, that it is something which is a world with so many challenges, and we can easily get lost. And many times, precisely when we learn these Sifrei Musar, we can sometimes get even more lost, because in a way we find contradictions, and from one area of our life to the other, and the fact that we live in this world, we're not living in a mountaintop. Not always we could understand or appreciate or internalize these important messages, which each one is important. Alter Rebbe took a very different approach, and explained us what our mandate is and what the Beinani is, and on the contrary, we ought to be a Beinani. Together with that, the definition of a Beinani is someone never sins and never sinned, but very far from a tzaddik. Again, how does that work? We learned. Go ahead. This is what we learned up till now, or namely in the original chapters up till Yud Beis. Yud Beis, Yud Gimel, Yud Daled, which deals with the Beinani, which you can look up on the very website. But why am I saying this? Because every Pedic over here is unique. Every Pedic unique. It's in a very perfect sequence, chapter after chapter, etc. Yet, if I may, the Pedic Lamed Hey has something very, very, something very fundamental. Like I say, each one from a different perspective is fundamental, but Pedic Lamed Hey, from its own perspective, is extremely fundamental, which the Alter Rebbe ultimately tells us. Because we're the Beinani, and because the mandate is the Beinani, in other words, you never get rid of your Yetzer Hara, and Nefesh Bahamis is always fully intact, and you never get rid of it. So what's the point? In other words, never get rid of the challenges, especially when it comes to thought, which is a more sensitive challenge, which is namely our most important challenge, to keep a pure thought, and pure mind, and so on, which, as we know, this is the greatest challenge a Frumi Yid has. So what was the point? What was the purpose of Kodesh Baruch Hu sent this neshama? That we would never be able to become that tzaddik again. That tzaddik is a matana. Kodesh Baruch Hu can give it as a present to a Yid to elevate him from the state of a Beinani to the state of a tzaddik. But on his own, the mandate of a Yid is to be a Beinani. Al Tehirasha. Again, I'm just throwing some tidbits of what the Alter Rebbe elaborated, and encourage everybody who didn't get to, who are newcomers, to look into those chapters again from the beginning, culminating in Yud Beis, Yud Gimel, Yud Daled, which the Yud Beis begins the Beinani. So the Alter Rebbe telling us that the Nefesh HaBahamis is fully intact, and that's the Beinani, and that's what we ought to strive to. And again, Beinani is someone who never sins and never sinned, but yet his Nefesh HaBahamis, his challenges are always there. So what was the point that Kodesh Baruch Hu sent out the Neshama into this world? Had our mandate to be a tzaddik, that we have the ability to completely transform our Nefesh HaBahamis. Meaning to say that the tzaddik doesn't ainly Yetzer Hara, he has no Yetzer Hara at all. That would make sense. You come down with the Yetzer Hara, but your mandate is to be the tzaddik and to completely get rid of the Yetzer Hara. Again, whatever that means, we can't. No one could really. It's very few tzaddikim. Someone who's bad and is labeled this guy's big tzaddik is not necessarily a tzaddik. Very far from a tzaddik. A tzaddik doesn't have a yetzer hara. But you think about this person who you just defined as a tzaddik, and that he has no yetzer hara. He has no yetzer hara. Be realistic. Not everybody was named tzaddik. Because we're talking about a tzaddik al pi Torah. A tzaddik is somebody who has no yetzer hara. But theoretically, if that would be the mandate of the Yid to hit tzaddik, that would be part of the program, that would make sense, because there is accomplishment that you were born with the yetzer hara and you have the ability to get rid of the yetzer hara. And again, think about it, whatever the means. It's hard to us to appreciate someone without a yetzer hara. Means to say he's not challenged. He walks out in the street, he's not challenged by anything that he has to keep his eyes, his mind away, and from this, that, and the other, because he doesn't have yetzer hara. Like other Rishon before the Chet. He weren't wearing, the Gemara says, the Torah says rather, that they weren't even wearing clothes. The leis b'shashu. The Elam, there wasn't a challenge because everything was a different level before the Chet. In other Rishon's conscious mind, we didn't have a yetzer hara. Rather, the other Rishon before the Chet was in a state where they wasn't challenged by anything. That's similar to the life of the tzaddik. So that would be part of the program, or that would be the program. That would make sense. And Neshama comes down into this world and is able to transform his yetzer hara completely and to get rid of anything which is associated with Ra. And everything like Isa b'chol levavcha, that yetzer hara is completely in love with the Kodesh Baruch Hu, and completely. That's the main mandate, or that would be the program, or the objective of the program. That would make sense why the Neshama would come down. But ultimately, you're saying that the Aveda, the main mandate of the Yid, is that to be a Beinani means say, despite your yetzer hara isn't fully intact, and challenging you on a constant basis, and you'll never, could be you'll build a whole life, decade after decade, never ridding the Nefesh Bahamis, Nefesh Zahara. It would always be challenging for you. Now, in the same token, again, we say challenging, meaning it's not chas v'shalom that the person sins. The moment the person sins, even machshavte, something accepts a machshava willingly, knowing that it's inappropriate, a thought, knowing it's inappropriate and he accepts it, he becomes a rosh on that moment. Now, to be a Beinani is not an easy, but the only thing it's doable, it's attainable, as the Alter Rebbe elaborates. The moment, for example, when it comes to a thought that you know it's inappropriate, you throw it away, b'shtei. Because if you accept it, if you deliberately accept it, you're called a rasha. You're not a Beinani anymore. But yet, in the same token, so the Beinani is li'over li'yavid, doesn't do any avedus, not in ma'aseh, not in action, not in speech, not even in thought, which is obviously very special. But we can appreciate that this is attainable. It's a milchama, it's a war, it's a battle, but if we stay focused, we know it's attainable. Even when it comes to thought, because a person is me'ech shal talev, we have the full ability to control even our thoughts, our eyes, our ears, and so on. Complete. We have the ability, that's the way the Rebbe created every human being, not only the Yid. He has the ability to govern over his heart. Means say the heart is sending a signal, the machshava will not accept it, the eyes will not accept it. But yet in the same token, it's a constant battle, it's a constant challenge. I never transformed my animal soul, never got rid of the yetzer hara. So what's the point? Why did David again? So if the program is to be a tzaddik, it would make sense. But if it's namely to be a Beinani, again, the whole tzaddik is a bonus. It's similar to the notion of a kohen. That if a Kodesh Baruch Hu makes you a kohen, you're a kohen. If you're born to a kohen, to a father kohen, you're a kohen. If not, then you're not a kohen. And the same thing, the notion of a tzaddik, it says it's similar like matana. Kodesh Baruch Hu decides to infuse within you the neshama of a tzaddik. And so, like again, we explain towards the end of chapter 14, and that's a possibility. Or in other areas, it's a Kodesh Baruch Hu decides you to be a tzaddik. If he doesn't decide you to be a tzaddik, you could be a Beinani kol yom. Meaning, being a Beinani means every day in your entire life, it'll be another struggle. And if it's a struggle, we never ultimately rid the yetzer hara. We never get rid of these temptations, or at least these signals, let's call it, which is coming from the lev, coming from the yetzer hara. So what's the point? Why did they wish to send down the neshama just to eismutchen? The neshama should just be bothered and to be, you can say, nagged by the yetzer hara an entire life. So what was the point? What's the purpose? I can't do the job anyway. So what did I come down to this world for? So in this very chapter, the Alter Rebbe is going to point out, and he says, in the end of the day, you're a Yid which was fulfilling Torah mitzvahs. You didn't rid the yetzer hara but nonetheless, you made sure the Yetzer Hara never persuade you, and ultimately, to Chas v'Shalom violate HaKadosh Baruch Hu's command, not in action, not in speech, not even thought. And again, mitzvah say you've done everything what HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells you to do. You constantly do everything that HaKadosh Baruch Hu asks you to do, in your action, in your speech, and in your thought. So even though in a core level, in other words, the Yetzer Hara is still fully intact, but you're ultimately doing what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants you to do, and staying away from what HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't want you to do. And that's very, very precious and very special. And that's why the pasuk says, La'asai. In the end of the day, we are implementing what HaKadosh Baruch Hu's mandate. And for this, it's worth for the neshama to come down. And again, the Alter Rebbe is going to demonstrate in this very chapter the important virtue over a neshama doing Torah mitzvahs as opposed to a neshama prior it's coming down into this world. Despite it's a neshama, and again remains, or it is a neshama which is a part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, chelik el kamimal, which is essentially a part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is apparently, what could you think about something greater than that? It's totally godly. So what does it need to adapt the godliness which exists in Torah and the godliness which exists in mitzvahs? Isn't it godly probably prior to its coming down to this world? So Alter Rebbe comes to explain this in Perek Lamed Hey. No, there's something very special when the neshama invests in a body, into a body, and is able, via the body, to learn Torah and do HaKadosh Baruch Hu's mitzvahs. Namely, when it comes to mitzvahs, we know we can only perform mitzvahs when the neshama is invested in a body, because if it's divested from body, we cannot perform mitzvahs. We cannot put on tefillin if the person doesn't have a hand. The neshama cannot put on tefillin. And for this, it's all worth it for the neshama to come down to perform Torah, to learn Torah, to do Hashem's mitzvahs, and that carries a greater virtue than the neshama prior it's coming down to this world, the way the neshama is on high, and therefore it's all worth it, despite we never have the ability, we don't have, again, as a Beinin, we don't have the ability to completely transform our Yetzer Hara, our Nefesh Bahamis, into Kedusha, because then again, it's kol, like the Alter Rebbe writes, ulei kol yom v'chavazu. All his life, he'll be in this very in war, in this very battle, because Yetzer Hara isn't fully intact, yet it's still worth it, because in this world he could fulfill HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Torah. And he could do HaKadosh Baruch Hu's mitzvahs, where the neshama divested from body cannot do. And for this, it's all worth it. And in this to come down into this goof, and the Alter Rebbe is going to explain in this chapter what is ultimately the virtue of learning Torah and doing mitzvahs over the neshama prior to its coming down into this world. Despite it maintains the greatest levels of holiness, as it's again nefesh elokis, it's a godly soul, which is a chelik l'kamimal mamash. And what could be a greater virtue than that? And what is again the specialty of doing a mitzvah over the neshama on its own? So, maybe we have a Perek Lamed Hey. We'll just do just a few lines, or maybe even one line. The Tesis Bir Tevis La Seisei. The Alter Rebbe is going to point out in this Perek, adding additional explanation and meaning to the words La Seisei, which says in the pasuk Yikorev Elecha Adover Me'ed B'ficha B'lvavcha La Seisei. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says this is close. Torah mitzvahs are close, and they're close to you. Dover Me'ed, they're very close to you. B'ficha B'lvavcha, in your mouth and in your heart. The Torah adds the word La Seisei, and to bring it into action. And again, this is what the Alter Rebbe is explaining us, the actions of mitzvahs, and the virtue of the action of mitzvahs. Again, we'll leave it off over here. We'll stop over here. We'll pick up from the second line over here, Gam Lahavin, Bez Hashem, the following class. But the Alter Rebbe points out that this is the as we mentioned before, the Alter Rebbe will explain, despite the Nefesh Elokis, again, the godly soul being a part of God prior to its coming down into this very physical world, yet there's a infinitely greater virtue as the neshama engages in the last seisei, in doing mitzvahs, as the Alter Rebbe will explain again as we will move on in this very coming class. Have a very good night.